colleague of mine, uh, Mr. Samir Patil, I am currently writing a paper on India's intelligence apparatus, the challenges, the strengths, the weaknesses, and this is something that we are submitting for a handbook, which hopefully will come out by the end of the year or early next year. So it was an ongoing work, and hopefully I'll be able to share that. We'll be able to share that in the coming months with all of you. Second was also that having seen the working of India's intelligence apparatus from the inside, I was fortunate to be part of the National Security Council Secretariat. And having seen the working of the Indian intelligence agencies from within, as being a part of the system, one did learn how that worked. What are the challenges? It's easy for us to sit and criticize कि मतलब कि ये ठीक नहीं होता है, वो ठीक नहीं होता है, ऐसे होता है, वैसे होता है. But when you're actually working there and you realize the actual challenges on ground, you do see inputs which come in, but their inputs are not actionable. You get a very broad kind of a thing saying that I say, but usme action lena is very very challenging. There are obvious, and this is happening across the board. We saw 9/11, September 11 attacks. The CBI and the FBI had different inputs, but they didn't choose to speak to each other, join the dots, so as to say. And that has happened across the world, and unfortunately that will happen in future also. That is something we can only lessen to whatever extent we can by uh, hand holding, forcing agencies to speak to each other and collaborate with each other. Technology does help to a large extent, given that we will be able to use artificial intelligence, various other kinds of softwares to actually see disparate pieces of information and join them together. But another point that I would like to make is we only see we as in the public only sees the failures. There are many cases, hundreds of cases where intelligence agencies succeed, which we never get to know. I remember after the unfortunate Mumbai attack in 2008, uh, the agencies received a lot of flack. Rightly so, wrongly so, we can think it was a major attack and we were not able to prevent it. But at that time, around that time, there were 800 other modules which had been actually uh, neutralized. I am not saying all of them were of the same magnitude. Obviously, they were not. But that is the kind of work which our agencies do with very little people in terms of pay, in terms of perks, in terms of the risk to their lives, in terms of human resources, technology. There are many challenges which, as outsiders, we don't realize, and that is something we must always take into cognizance. Like Ankit says, the way that it is portrayed in the media or the way it is portrayed in cinema is very different from how actually it works. So there are very real challenges there. Lastly, before I begin, I'd just like to say that I am using only open source information here, uh, uh, and I'm only whatever has been published in journals, newspapers, interviews, etc., will be used here. I will not be able to speak to you about some things which are not there in the open domain, so please bear with me. With that, I will uh, just share my presentation and we can start. Please let me know once you are able to see.
Yes, sir. You may start sharing once. Yeah, we are able to see, sir.
Okay, I'll just make it full screen.
Yep. Yes, you are able to see.
Okay, thank you. So these are the broad contour of my presentation in terms of uh, what all I'm planning to speak to you about in this next about half an hour, 40 minutes of time that we have. I'll begin with the brief history of agencies, the framework that they work under in terms of the constitutional framework, what are the challenges therein, what are the major acts and what are the legislations that we have actually worked with. Next, I'll be speaking on the existing intelligence framework. And once we do that, I'll be speaking to you about the reforms that have happened over time. That is something that is important to also know, because uh, Kargil Review Committee, the KRC, is something that we all do need know about, or the group of ministers following the KRC recommendations. But there has been continuous efforts on part of the policymakers, on part of the government of India, various committees, some of which are available in the public domain, but there are many others which we do not know about, which we cannot speak about because they are still in the classified domain. Uh, Following that, I'll also be speaking to you about the changes after the Mumbai 2611 attacks in 2008. What are the changes which happened? How were it strengthened? Subsequently, I'll briefly speak to you about the existing challenges which are there, and conclude the presentation with the kind of successes or the track record that which have been there of the Indian agencies. Brief overview of the agency. The Intelligence Bureau, which works under the Ministry of Home Affairs, is the oldest in terms of the agencies which are there. It started in the British times, and this was actually set up in 1887 on the recommendation of Lord Ruthven, who was then the British Viceroy. So the oldest agency is the Intelligence Bureau. It was started in terms of as to look at thugs and these kind of thieves, and it has subsequently evolved into something that we know today as one of the premier intelligence agencies that India has. I'll also highlight one interesting article. Some of you, which you would, if you are interested, you can read about it more. This came out at the 100 years of the Intelligence Bureau, centenary of the Intelligence Bureau. There is an Indian Police Journal, which is brought out by the Bureau of Police Research and Development. It's available online on their website. This October December 2012 is in a special issue where it was the commemoration of the centenary of the Intelligence Bureau. So a lot of details are there on that issue of the journal. Then the second agency, which looks at the external aspects. The Intelligence Bureau largely looks at the internal aspects, counter-terrorism, counter-intelligence, uh, terrorism is another area, counter-terrorism is another area, smuggling, drug smuggling. There are overlapping areas. How do you realize that when there is cross-border terrorism, whether it falls into the domain of the RNAW, which looks at external intelligence, or the Intelligence Bureau, which looks at domestic intelligence? So that is always a challenge, and that is where coordination between agencies becomes very important. The second agency to be set up, which looks at the foreign intelligence of the country, is the Research and Analysis Wing, RNAW, which is under the Cabinet Secretariat. It is headed by a secretary who's called the Secretary R, and it was set up following the 1962 Sino-Indian War, the Indian loss in the 1962 war, and following that the 1965 Indo-Pak War also. There were certain discussions between the army and also the intelligence agencies about the Ichogil Canal, that how the Pakistani plans to flood the Ichogil Canal were not communicated, and there was a gap in communication The IB said at that time, this was prior to the setting of the RNAW. The IB countered this, saying that it had sent it to the headquarters, but it had not filtered down to the field, and that resulted in this kind of a situation where we did not know about, and on ground know about this intelligence, which proved to be costly. The other main intelligence agency, large intelligence agency, is in the military intelligence, which works under the Ministry of Defense. And after the KRC, we now have Defense Intelligence Agency, which is a central military intelligence agency. Talking about the broad constitutional framework, here is where the coordination becomes more challenging, because public order, police are all coming under the state list, whereas the defense of India comes under the center list. So there is always this kind of a challenge. How do you actually coordinate between the states and the center? And the most recent kind of challenge which we saw was in the setting up of the National Counter-Terrorism Center, NCTC, where actually many states opposed it. This whole idea saying that it will go against the federal setup that the Constitution of India enshrines, and it is taking away many of the responsibilities, many of the powers of the various states. The NCTC has its own had its own problems. One thing that we must definitely realize is that just importing something from the West, from the United States or wherever else, is not going to be very successful. Uh, have a different system, they have a different political system, different kind of resources, manpower, etc. We need to use those ideas, but tweak it to our own requirements, our own realities. That is something which is very important. Next to the legislations, the Intelligence Agencies Act, Restriction of Rights Act 1985, which came up, which looks at some of the major intelligence agencies are regulated by this, which is the Intelligence Bureau, the Research and Analysis Wing, Director General of Security under the RNAW, and most recently the NTRO, or the National Technical Research Organization. These four agencies are governed by the Intelligence Agencies Act. This is not to say that various other agencies are not there, but this act is also available on the Lok Sabha website. If you want to, you can look it up on the website of the Lok Sabha of the Parliament. These are the four agencies which are governed by this, in terms that they are not allowed, people who work in these agencies are not allowed to join any kind of trade unions, to form any kind of unions. They can form social, personal kind of groups, clubs, etc. But they should not actually have any political kind of overtone. So there are certain restrictions that you give up. Many of us who join intelligence agencies have to sign the OSA, the Official Secrets Act, which is why I said that I am not going to be able to speak to you on anything that is not in the public domain. But there is a lot which is coming out, lot of discussion which is available in the open domain also, which gives us a great insight into the working of the agencies. The next is the charter of the Intelligence Bureau in RNAW, which lays out the responsibilities, which lays out the challenges. The charter came up, the discussion for the charter has been happening for a long period of time. And the demand, interestingly, though many would not actually think like that, but the demand has come from the agencies themselves. Why is the charter important? The charter actually tells the agencies and its personnel what they would like to do, what are their responsibilities, what are their charter of duties, what should they focus on, what is the political establishment wants them to do. So that is why the charter of the agencies is important. And the group of ministers after the Kargil Review Commission actually set up the formal charter of both the Intelligence Bureau and the Research and Analysis Wing. Then we had a private member bill, which was in the floor, which was tabled in the House of the Parliament by the Congress MP Manish Tiwari. This was a private members bill, intelligence agencies bill, which was seeking to govern, which was seeking to give some oversight to the various agencies in terms of legislative oversight to control their powers, also have a checks or balances through the legislature. We will speak about this later on in the presentation. I'll move ahead. This is the broad intelligence structure of the country. At the top, we have the Prime Minister's office, the National Security Council, which was set up after the KC Pant Committee and followed by the Kargil Review Committee. The National Security Advisor, also instituted by the KC Pant Committee 1998. And under the NSC and the National Security Advisor, you have the National Security Council Secretariat. The Secretariat has also gone in terms of various, it has had various evolutions, changes, and most recently you have the Joint Intelligence Committee, which was taken out of the NSCS as a separate entity under the NSCS. Okay, but it has now been again merged with the NSCS. You have the again, let me highlight an article which has been written by Ambassador P.S. Raghavan in the Journal of Defense Studies, IDSA. It's a fascinating article. He was till recently, he was the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. And he has written a fascinating article on the evolution of the NSCS and various other national security structures. So they have also changed in terms of when the NSCS was set up, we had only one deputy national security advisor helping the NSA, assisting the NSA. Now we have, it has become much larger in terms of we have 4 wings which look at foreign, which look at various internal security, which is now the JIC is primarily looking at internal security. We have a cyber security wing. So the NSCS is also evolved and has grown much stronger. Recently, they had the allocation of business rules also, which is the what governs government departments. So the current government has put in allocation of business rules, and NSCS is part of that now. So it gives this thing for them to work with other agencies, other government departments, and under the current National Security Advisor Sri Doval, the NSCS has gone from strength to strength in terms of coordination. They are the main coordinating body which has the wherewithal to ask other agencies and then inform the National Security Advisor and the Prime Minister through that. The other main agency, which is India's technical agency, technical intelligence agency, or TechInt as we call it, is the National Technical Research Organization. The NTRO is also a creation of post-Kargil Review Committee, and they are one of the major technical intelligence agencies set up in 2004. And they are also, as I mentioned, is governed by the Intelligence Organization Restriction of Rights Act 1985. Now, the idea behind the setting up of the NTRO was that we should, as far as possible, it is not possible all the time, it is not maybe desirable all the time, but as far as possible, technical assets, given the high cost of them, should be with one agency, which is the NTRO. That was the whole idea. Obviously, many agencies seek to differ. They have personnel, they have invested their money, they had to buy certain assets, and they are not very happy to give them away down to the NTRO. But that is slowly and steadily, that is something which has happened. I am not saying that it has not been resisted. Of course, it has been resisted, and that is something which we should accept, and that is part of the process that these things do happen. The third under the Prime Minister's office are the other agencies, which is the Research and Analysis Wing. Research and Analysis Wing in the Foreign Intelligence Agency, and it has the Aviation Research Center, which is aerial reconnaissance and various other things which comes under the ARC. It is headed by a secretary who does both line and staff functions. So you have the director role of the RNAW, in which he looks at files, he looks at various other recruitments and the other kind of line functions. You also have him playing the role of the secretary R in the cabinet secretariat, in which he negotiates and gets things done for the agency as the secretary of the agency. So that is the research and analysis wing, um, looking primarily at India's foreign intelligence requirements. It has agents, it has officials posted abroad in various capacities across the world. Several credits to its name. Primarily among them is the 1971 Bangladesh War, where it played a stellar role in supporting the Mukti Bahini and assisting Bangladeshis in resisting the kind of genocide which was happening at the behest of Pakistan, which was then West Pakistan. And they played a stellar role in the 1971 war. And that was after very few years. They had just recently set up in 1968, 21st September 1968. And a short period after that, you had them actually playing such an important stellar role is something which goes a long way in the early leadership that the RNAW was fortunate to have in RN Cow, and also K. Shankaran Nair and many others who will remain unnamed, but they did play a major role. We have this book by Nitin Gokhale, Gentleman's Spy Master RN Cow. If you are interested in the initial setting up of the RNAW, you should definitely read this book by Nitin Gokhale. Uh, Let me go forward and move to the next this thing, which is under the Ministry of Home Affairs, under the control of the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is the Intelligence Bureau, one of the oldest agencies, the oldest agency that we have, which is looking primarily at the domestic intelligence. It has in the past had assets abroad, officers stationed abroad. They still do it on very limited this thing. Primarily, it is the research and analysis wing who posted their officers abroad in various locations. Under that, you have the multi-agency center, or MAC, which they call it. MAC was something which was set up uh, to actually be the clearinghouse of various inputs which come at a tactical level on a daily basis, to go through these inputs, go and look at what they are, look at them for their teaching, and ask the agencies what are the sources, what is the quality of your sources, can this be relied, and task other agencies on a day-to-day basis to see, to verify these inputs. So that is what the MAC does under the Ministry of Home Affairs, or the MHA. They have other paramilitary forces, TPMFs, like the CRPF and the Border Security Force, also having intelligence wings, intelligence directorates in a very limited level. And they are largely looking at very limited tasks like border security, smuggling, cattle smuggling across Bangladesh border, drug smuggling. So they are helping the larger agencies and providing inputs to them, like the IB and others, to or the DRI, for instance, to actually look at these kind of uh, tasks, but on a very limited basis. Their functions are very well defined, and they are very then you have move on to the Ministry of Finance. You have the Department of Revenue Intelligence, DRI, which is another agency which works under the Ministry of Finance. As the name suggests, looking at various fake currency, looking at revenue intelligence in terms of sort of customs and excise violations. Financial Intelligence Unit India, FIU, is another new creation which is under the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Defense, one of the largest, and as I said before, in terms of the RNAW and IB, the Ministry of Defense is the largest setup. The most recent creation is the Defense Intelligence Agency, and that is also created after the Kargil Review Committee. And before that, you had the military intelligence under the Indian Army, air intelligence and naval intelligence under the Air Force and Navy, respectively. Again, looking at particular tactical now cross-border operations feeding into that. Uh, some of the larger like signal intelligence and this thing were given to the DIA following the KRC, the recommendations of the KRC, and after the creation of the Chief of Defence Staff, the DIA and the Director General DIA has actually under the integrated defense staff that will slowly become more stronger and take shape. So that is another area that we need to watch out very carefully for the kind of evolution which is happening within that, because that is something which is still under evolution. It will grow in strength in the coming months and years as the CDS takes shape and the entire office and the organization takes shape along with that. Moving on, reforms in intelligence structure over time. Um, we hear about, as I said, about KRC and the group of ministers, but we do not hear about many of these others which are there. The Henderson Brooks Brigadier Bhagat report, 1962 war, looking at various operational sort of challenges which were there in the 1962 war. Why did we lose the 62 war? So that was something essentially it has still not been declassified, but Neville Maxwell was an Australian journalist who published large sections of it on the website, on the internet, and many people have actually accessed it, looked at that. So they looked at the military leadership, looked at the intelligence apparatus, and tried to analyze why what happened. Why were we not able to see the kind of problems and gauge China's intentions about this? So that was the first sort of intelligence sort of committee which looked at various flaws and problems therein. Then we have the B.S. Raghavan committee, which was set up following the 65 war. As I mentioned, Raghavan was a senior home ministry official, and he looked at this whole problem about the Ichogil Canal plan of the Pakistan army, that they were planning to open the canal in order to flood the tankable approaches. And the army at that time had blamed the intelligence bureau. And in his book, K. Shankaran Nair, who worked with R.N. Kao and became the second chief of the research and analysis wing. In his book, he has written that where he went before this committee and with some 50 reports, which actually brought out this whole thing that it had been sent by the IB to the headquarters, but it had failed to trickle down to the ground level, because of which the field formations were not aware of this. This is what Shankaran Nair has said. So it was essentially the Henderson Brooks, that is the 62 war and the 65 war challenges that made the government realize, Mrs. Gandhi realize when she came back into power after passing away of Jawaharlal Nehru. Slowly she came into power and she realized that there is a need to set up a separate intelligence agency which looks at the foreign intelligence, or particularly at the foreign intelligence, because the intelligence bureau alone cannot be looking at everything. That they are looking at domestic intelligence, they are looking at borders, they are looking at foreign intelligence. That is something of an overstretch. So in 1968, she set up uh, the research and analysis wing under the um, R.N. Kao's leadership, and in a very short period of time, which goes to the kind of uh, ability of his team and Cow himself. And you all might be familiar with B. Raman's book, Cowboys of RNAW, and he very fondly talks about the initial years and as RN Cow as a leader, how he managed to sort of mentor so many people and the vision that he had about the research and analysis. I think it is definitely a fascinating read. So I'll suggest that uh, you should definitely take a look at the book. The next committee which was set up was the LP Singh committee, which was set up following the end of the emergency. And the LP Singh committee looked at the functioning of the IB, the RNAW, and the CBI, and the fact that that Morarji Desai was very suspicious when he became the prime minister. He was very suspicious of these agencies and the kind of actions that they had taken at the behest of the then prime minister during the emergency. So, in fact, it is quite well known that he had a staunchly hostile attitude towards the intelligence agencies in general, and he unfortunately sought to cut many of these organizations, the RNW, actually to size, which he said, and extensive human intelligence network and foreign operations, especially in Pakistan, were also uh, rolled back during this time. And many people, many of us believe that this is something that the agencies have still not recovered from, this kind of shutting down, because human intelligence is something that you develop over time. You have to build a trust, unlike technical intelligence, because it can go either way. The person can actually be supplying you information and supplying the other side with the information that he gives you. So in terms of that, you can actually have a double agent. So trust is a very important factor in running source in terms of human intelligence source. And that also unfortunately led to the expressions of the lack of trust in the RNAW by the Prime Minister. It led in RN Cow actually taking the decision to retire prematurely, which was a big loss to the nascent RNAW and the Indian intelligence setup in general. Then we have another committee, which was the the Shankara Nair committee in the 1980s under the Rajiv Gandhi, where he actually set up a committee under the Shankara Nair, who was the second chief of the RNAW, and he was essentially looking at the human resource management in terms of how do you staff these agencies, various, not only RNAW but other intelligence agencies also, which is continues to be a challenge for us even today. And I will talk about this in some time. Going to the 1998 KC Pant task force, where the idea of the NSC, NSCS, NSA was enshrined, set up by Prime Minister Vajpayee. KC Pant played a stellar role, the committee played a stellar role in actually setting up the foundations of what our agency intelligence structure, national security structure looks like today. Followed by that, we had the Kargil Review Committee after the Kargil War, which saw the setting up, as I had mentioned, of the National Technical Research Organization. The restructuring of the RNAW was also something which happened uh, at that point in time. The group of ministers, one has to look at the KRC and the group of ministers together. Because the recommendations which were made by the K. Subramaniam led Kargil Review Committee was looked at by a group of ministers under the head of then Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister Shri L.K. Advani. And they had set up several subcommittees. One of the committees were looking at intelligence, then looked at border management, many of these kind of aspects that they looked at. And very important kind of changes which came out of this. Some of them were that there needs to be a charter of responsibilities and role for the IB and the RNAW. Restructuring of the RNAW was another thing which they actually said that many of the parts of the which could be sort of given off because that was taking the focus away from the RNW, like the SSB, the Border Security Agency along the Nepal and Bhutan border, that was hide off from the RNW and given to the MHA, like other paramilitary forces. A greater involvement of the military in the ARC's functioning, that is the Aviation Research Center, the imaging intelligence wing of RNAW. So these kind of restructuring, these kind of changes were proposed to take place as part of the GOM recommendations. Establishment of NTRO, which was essentially on the lines of the US National Security Agency as the premier technical intelligence agency, is another part which happened. DIA is another thing, the Military Intelligence Agency under the Integrated Defense Staff of the Ministry of Defense. So DIA, as I had mentioned, was put in charge of the DIPAC, that is the Defense Image Processing and Analysis Center, which handled in satellite acquisition capability, and the Signals Intelligence Directorate, which looked at the interception and decryption of any communications. We are a very large body within the and powerful body within the military intelligence. So these two were actually put under the by the group of ministers under the DRDO. Another thing which is sort of started by the KRC and then also pushed through by the group of ministers is the beginning of entry of lateral, that is direct recruitment, lateral entry by experts, by people from academia, various walks of life into the National Security Council Secretariat. The idea being they realized that intelligence gathering, intelligence analysis is a very specialized kind of a thing. You need experts who are looking at international relations, defense studies, economics, from various walks of life to actually look at all these various inputs, look at it together with open source inputs, and put it up to the higher levels of the government for their action or their perusal. So the lateral entry was started in the NSCS, also later on in the NTRO, and that is something which has been quite successful, I would say, which definitely needs more strengthening. The SD Pradhan Committee post Mumbai 2611 and the Naresh Chandra Committee, uh, we don't have too much information about that, but they are essentially looked at post Mumbai. The Pradhan Committee looked at various lacunae, various state level, central level, what are the various problems that are faced in terms of not only about intelligence but also about equipment, various other problems. The Naresh Chandra Committee looked at intelligence and the overall national security apparatus, national security structure. Um, Moving on, what are the major changes that happened post 2611? And I know I am running out of time, so I will be a little faster. I am almost done. Uh, One of the major changes which happened was the strengthening of the multi-agency center, like I mentioned. The multi-agency center is now one of the very important kind of aspects of the Indian um, intelligence on a daily basis, tactical intelligence which is received, because it's a clearing house, like I mentioned. Various agencies representatives sit together every day excuse me, and they look at this thing. They have SMACs, that is subsidiary multi-agency center, um, at the districts level, at the state level. Police stations and various central agencies are also networked to the MAC. You have daily meetings, like I mentioned, with various agencies, almost 26 agencies, paramilitary forces, etc., sit together and discuss various pieces of intelligence which is coming together. Another important thing which happened after 2611 was the daily briefing which the intelligence chief with the Home Minister and the NSA, which happened on a daily basis. In that they wanted better coordination, and the political leadership also realized that this is not something which comes naturally, because agencies generally protect their assets, protect their information, because they realize sometimes it might just compromise an ongoing operation or ongoing thing. So that something is the political leadership realized has to be taken at a higher level, and these inputs were shared with the Home Minister and the National Security Advisor on a daily basis, which did prove to be very useful. The NAT grid is another thing which has come about after 2611 in terms of collating various of these. So you have various other softwares which are now being used to pull out information from various technical or signal intelligence, various discrete pieces of information, and using artificial intelligence or others to sort of analyze them in real time or close to real time basis. So that is something that CMS and Netra and various other kinds of softwares which are being used, and the NatGrid is trying to bring together all these information on one seamless platform network which is there. Um, the NCTC. So the NCTC was an idea which was pushed after 2611 when uh, Sri P. Chidambaram was the Home Minister. And that idea was that, like the collation center or in the US, where the NCTC would bring together all the information from various agencies, whether it is the CIA, DIA, the FBI, and other kind of agencies, Homeland Security, and it would collate them, a clearing house, and it would then say it would under the National Security Coordinator, he would actually work. So that was the US model. But obviously, just cutting and pasting that in India was not something that would work. And as I had mentioned, it received a lot of resistance from the states because of the system, the federal system that we have. Many states felt that this was not the right thing to do because it would actually impinge on the power, the policing, and other functions that the state has. And the states were not very much consulted with this at that point in time. So the NCTC did not go much forward, but there are many other things which have actually helped us to prevent a major attack after 2611. Track record of agencies, um, and I will finish after this. You had the IB before the RNAW. Actually, RN Cow being deputed by the IB. He was working at the IB at that point in time to Ghana and to set up their intelligence agency. One of the earliest kind of things that we did immediately after independence. Another was the Taiwan's attempt to actually sabotage the plane where the TRC premier Chow En Lai would travel. Fortunately, Chow En Lai did not embark that plane, but the delegation actually suffered. Delegations, the plane got sabotaged, and they unfortunately lost their lives. So there was an investigation where the Chinese, the PRC, actually wanted the intelligence agencies, Indian intelligence agencies, to look at this. And again, RN Cow was deputed to head this investigation, which he did to the much pleasure and the satisfaction of the Chinese. And he, as is mentioned in Shankara Nayar's book, and also Cowboys, many is publicly available, that he was the Chow En Lai was very pleased by his investigation, and he received a personal seal from him when he met him in person. 1965 war advance notice on the Pakistan airfields, but there was a glitch here, and it's a thing that when the person who was decrypting the codes, he actually made a mistake in the date of the Pakistani raid. So actually, this is mentioned in the B. Raman's book, fascinating book. So the agencies knew about this particular raid, and they were waiting to actually counter the Pakistani raid. But the first day that they waited, nothing happened, and they were worried कि ये क्या हुआ करके. 71 war, Mukti Bahini and the support of Mujibur Rahman, well known, very great success of the 71 war. 1980s, here Ajit Doval played an important role, that the Mizo National Front major commanders actually weaned away from Lal Denga, which forced him to come to negotiations and a ceasefire subsequently. 1988, again, Mr. Doval played an important role in entering the premises of the Golden Temple, staying there, collecting information, and then coming out and actually uh, allowing the agencies, allowing the forces, security forces, to carry out a much more well-informed operation inside the temple, Golden Temple. 1990s, by the recently deceased Sri K. Santanam, who was a crucial part of the SNT wing in the RNAW at that time. From the DRDO, he had been there, and he tracked the Pakistani nuclear program, progress of the nuclear weapons program, and it informed the policymakers well in advance of Pakistan's efforts in the 1980s and 1990s to actually build their nuclear weapon program. And thereafter, we also responded because we realized that that was something that was inevitable. 1998, you had a major counterintelligence operation by the IB to actually uh, mislead or to hide, whatever you want to call it, the our of second test at Pokhran 2 Operation Shakti, and that was a major success of the agencies and scientists and all involved there, and they managed to actually predict when the CIA and other foreign agency satellites would fly over, have a pass over Pokhran, and they would not work at that point in time. uh, this Raj Chengappa's book has details of this, and it's a fascinating read. Post 26/11, as I mentioned, no major terror attack. Uri is something which Ankit mentioned, that is also and largely intelligence driven operation, because post 2008 there have been efforts, like current continued efforts, to build up knowledge about across the board, across the border, across IB or LOC, the kind of terror scams and terror crimes which were there, and update them on a regular basis. Now, briefly talk about challenges, and I'll stop here. Several challenges which are there. One major challenge which needs to be definitely addressed is the need for statutory recognition. Our agencies have been working through executive orders, whether it is the NSCS, the NSA, the RNAW, or the IB. That needs to change, and that is something which will strengthen them, and that is something which the agencies themselves are have discussed and welcomed. I remember reading in a thing where when VP Singh was the Prime Minister, this was something which was discussed at the behest of the Jaswant Singh, who was then the member of Parliament in one of the standing committees. This was discussed, and the agencies actually welcomed this step. But subsequently, it has not been. It is essentially something which has to be pursued politically at the political level, not at the agencies level. So, and law has to be thing, and all major countries, whether it is the United Kingdom, France, USA, have done that, and I believe the time has come for us also to enact legislation through the Parliament to give them the statutory recognition and protection, and the define their roles, functions, powers. Second is the need for legislative oversight. Again, why this is important and has been discussed, welcomed by the agencies, is because of the fact that the political interference in the action of the intelligence agencies reduces because of this, right? They can say that this is not in my charter, this is not something that I can do, and I am not willing to carry out these kind of actions. Secondly, it also protects the staff of the agencies when they are in under overseas operation, or from like the Scooter Libby incident in the United States. It was because of the law which protected the CIA officer when her name was actually mentioned publicly, and a covert operative, I might add, when by Scooter Libby, who was then the chief of staff of the vice president Dick Cheney. So there is necessary to put legislative oversight. There have been many proposals. If you read the IDSA task force on intelligence, which is available on their website, that also looks at various checks and balances and various proposals which have come through. Do we like the follow the US model, which looks at much more intrusive legislative oversight, or look at the UK model or the French model, which looks at the finances, which look at broad policy prescriptions? So there are many sort of models, successful, not so successful, which are out there, which other countries have followed, and which something that we need to actually look at and adopt. And this is in the long run, which is something that the agencies will draw their strength from and protect their own staff. Because of recruitment is another challenge which is slowly being addressed, but much more needs to be done. The staff, well trained staff at the in the agencies, that is the RNAW, IB, and other agencies, is short of staff. Primarily because for several years they have not been recruiting. It is slowly starting again. But the point is, the debate was always whether they should have a civil service type of examination or direct campus or lateral entry recruitment. And many intelligence chiefs, Vikram Sood and others, have mentioned that the intelligence agents or personnel are not civil servants. They need multiple skills. They need language skills, they need interrogation skills, they need weapon handling skills, they need to be quick on their feet, they need their personality needs to be monitored, personality needs to be sort of development needs to be done. So there are multiple things which they need, and there are different breed of people, different kind of people which needs to be uh, recruited from into these agencies, which might not be possible when you go to the UPSC or SSB or other kind of direct recruitments is the thing. But that is something which the political leadership, top leadership, has to push through to actually tide over the shortage of trained manpower at the junior and middle level, that is. So in when the regular recruitment of RAS or the ACIO in the IB is not happening, so it actually, there is a major manpower shortage. Human resource management becomes a task, and what happens in both these agencies as a result of is that this dominance by deputation, especially of IPS officers, takes place, and that brings down the morale of the people who are cadre intelligence operatives in RNAW or IB, because they don't see promotion being possible or reaching to higher levels being possible, because at the top levels or the middle and the higher levels, largely the IPS officers come on deputation and they occupy those positions. So there is this problem, and as rightly I would believe Vapala Balachandran, IPS but a carrier, he has been in the RNW, has mentioned, you cannot run the army or you cannot run the space agency on deputation. Similarly, you cannot run an intelligence agency only through deputation. You need people from other walks of life. You need people from the army to work there because of their particular knowledge. You need people from ISRO, like, or other agencies to work there. Linguists from other departments to work in agencies. But it has to be, cadre has to be built. This has to be something which has to be strengthened on and on a uh, faster basis. And linked to that is the training, that one needs to ramp up the capacity of our training schools, impart language skills, very languages like Dari, Pashto, Arabic or Chinese is much more easier, but there are many other Pakistani South Asian languages, where there are very, very few experts, which we need, intelligence agencies need, and the syllabi, instructors, and the kind of training which is given in these training schools need to be actually thing. And turf battle coordination I have spoken about, and we are, I think, trying to uh, lessen them as far as possible. But this is something which is the nature of the beast, as I would say. We cannot completely eliminate them, but we can only foster, force more coordination and lessen these kind of turf battles which will happen, so that they don't affect larger national security challenges that India faces. I will stop here, and thank you for a very patient hearing.
Thank you so much, sir. It was quite an enlightening talk, sir, and quite a fascinating presentation. I guess you have covered a lot of issues pertaining to the challenge in terms of challenges as well as issues the Indian intelligence agencies face. So now we enter into the question answer session. Will be quick as I can see we have overshoot the timing. I would request everyone to put their question, type their question in chat box, or if you may want to ask your question, you can do that by raising your hand. But sir, I would like to take the moderator's privilege of asking the first question uh, to you, sir. So my question is regarding the the battle between the traditional intelligence practices as well as the in terms of the emerging tech environment. As we all are aware that India is, I mean, a lot of intelligence practices in India is is around the traditional practices in terms of intelligence collection, in terms of we are not that technically capable as compared to the country in the west. So how are we actually grappling, because there is always constantly a battle between actually being into tech and having your finger digital footprints and having your technical capabilities. How are we shifting from human into technical in and how does India see that in current context?
Okay, thank you. Um, So this is a very real challenge, and because technical intelligence is more quantifiable, you can measure it, and you can also validate it because you have certain kind of recordings or certain kind of signals which you have intercepted. It is largely becoming the more preferred go-to route uh, by most intelligence agencies across the world, and India is no different in that. But the problem with that is uh, that human intelligence, why people are moving away from that, is it's more difficult, it is more risky, it takes time, doesn't give you instant kind of quick results, because the trust has to be built between the person who is managing the source and the source. So that is something which needs uh, uh, but the information which a good human source human can actually give you, it will add much more value to this technical intelligence that you receive from various sources, whether signals, imagery, or various other kind of things. So there is this kind of a tussle between more traditional forms, human and others, and technical intelligence. And I think as the it is inevitable that TechInt will take the lion's share of the intelligence generation. The sources that we have, that is inevitable, because everybody is working on mobile phones. You have new information coming through social media platforms. The terrorists themselves are using everything from Turaya phones to clone the SIM cards to various other things. So the agencies should not be, cannot be afford to be far behind in that domain. So that will definitely happen, but I would still like to urge that the kind of uh, human that we can that 1 or 2% that we get from a good source will actually give us a better picture Like for instance, what happened in the 65 war, 71 war, and these kind of things, that our sources provided is with a larger picture which was not available otherwise to us. um,
Right, sir. So we have a few couple of questions in our chat box. We have Air Commodore Kedar sir, who is asking question that MAC, SMAC, NAT grades are good initiative to collect information, but what about sharing the information? What about sharing of pertinent information, especially with the private industry like Fusion Center of the US, where int flows both way? I think he has a question regarding the sharing of information with private players, I think crucial private players, I guess, who are involved in national security issues.
hmm, hmm.
So,
I do believe that what happens in wherever there is intelligence or a clear thing that a particular, like the Taj, this thing, the leading up to the 2000, there were so many officers had visited and had informed the Taj management about that there is this kind of a risk, kind of a Reiki has happened, or this kind of risk, or you have to put up these barriers. But unfortunately, did not happen, and we paid the price for that. But the thing is that uh, it will still take us time, and the MAC and these kind of organizations or bodies will filter it down to the police agencies, who will uh, inform or share this information with the public, the private sector, or the companies, whether they are oil refineries or they are hotels or other kind of high risk kind of bodies or organizations, companies. That will happen. But directly, as is happening in the US, I am not very sure that it will happen on a in the coming few months or years. It will take more time for that to happen in India, is my belief. Like what
yes.
you are saying about the fusion center, the NCTC was essentially looked at as a fusion center, but like I mentioned, that did not happen.
Right. If anyone has question, who if you want to ask directly to the speaker, they can raise your hand, and I can allow you to. You can go ahead with your question. Uh, if anyone has a question, yes. Sh- I see someone. You can raising a hand. Again, you can go ahead with Sundar. Sundar, you have a question. Sundar
Yeah,
Bish.
yeah. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, and
Yes,
just
yes.
a just give a please brief introduction. Keep your question short, and then you may go.
Okay. Okay, I'm Sundar Bist. I just wanted to know that the Shekatkar committee, which wanted to, see the economic reforms in the Indian Army or in the Defense Forces, had recommended a tri-service intelligence school for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. So, what is the delay in having such a tri-service intelligence school? Secondly, if you see whether it is Pathankot or whether it is Mumbai, there is a problem with the Air Force and the Navy intelligence. They are at a very nascent stage, unlike the Indian Army, which has got a good military intelligence setup. So why can't we merge all the three under a DG Armed Forces Intelligence or maybe under the DIA? What is your recommendation on this?
Let me take both of them together. As I mentioned, with the coming in of the CDS, I think this will be an area where lot of changes will come in place, because as you are well aware, the DIA or the IDS was, in some sense, it did not fit anywhere into the system, because at the apex the CDS was absent in some sense. That is what the GOM had recommended, and for many years, because of various reasons, that did not take place. So as that CDS is coming into play, and you have additional secretary level, joint secretary level officers who have military serving officers for the first time in the Ministry of Defense, all these things will sort of come. I think right now it's still nascent days for the CDS and the Department of Military Affairs, and they will look at many of these issues in the coming years, coming months and years, because like what you are saying is very very true. There, this all these, the army intelligence MI is much 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 larger than what the Air Force and the and the Navy intelligence are, and one needs to actually see how they can be brought together, work together on a more sort of collaborative manner, and that is something I believe the DMA will look at in the coming years.
Thank you
Okay,
so much,
thank you.
sir.
Thank
If
you.
anyone has an other question who wants to ask directly to the speaker, meanwhile, sir, if someone raises hand, yeah, Rahul, you want to ask a question?
Yes, sir. I'm
Hello.
audible.
Yes, you're audible. Right? Yes, go ahead, Rahul.
Hi, sir. Good morning. Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Rahul from CUG. And so my
Yes.
question is related to the how the use of artificial intelligence will affect the efficacy of intelligence agencies and how it will impact the human intelligence, as well as what is the current status of use of adoption of this new technology into Indian intelligence mechanism or setup.
Right, and sir,
Thank you.
let's take two questions together, sir. I see Shri Kutan has also raised hand. Shri, you would you like to go ahead with the question?
Yeah, thank you. Sir, my question was on the cyber warfare, electronic warfare, and signal intelligence capacities of India. So, Vikram Sood, as you mentioned, has repeatedly stressed on the need to develop this. So, how far have we come, say, in the past 1 decade, sir? How do you rate India's capabilities? And how equipped are you against China?
Um, okay. Well, let me take both these together because they are certain overlap in terms of artificial intelligence and also SIGINT cyber capability, electronic warfare capabilities. Uh, the China threat is very well recognized, more so in recent years because of Doklam and the recent clashes. So we are not focused primarily on Pakistan as one was doing in the initial years. China is very much on the radar of the national security apparatus. So let me start with that. Um, in terms of artificial intelligence cyber capabilities, we had the National Cyber Security Coordinator, Dr. Gulshan Rai, who was for a long period of time, he was the Director General of the CERT-IN, the Emergency Response India, Cyber Emergency Response Team India. He was the Director General of that. The current government made him the uh, National Cyber Security Coordinator, and the idea was that many of these capabilities exist in intelligence agency, exist in the private sector. Human resources are also likewise distributed, more so in the private sector as compared to the government, within the government or within the agencies. So there was a need to have this public and government kind of a public private cooperation, public private interface. And the cyber security coordinator, one of the main tasks which he was given was to ensure this kind of a fusion between the two, that they are able to, whether it is the DSCI, whether it is the other kind of organization, CII, all these have important roles to play if you have to tackle, because cyber, artificial intelligence, all these are areas where things change. And what is you are planning for some capabilities today, by the time the capabilities come up, everything else has changed. You have 5G. By the time you have 5G countering, for example, 5G countering techniques, 6G is coming into play. People are working on 6.5. So these are because of the rapidly changing pace of technologies in this. You need to have public and private partnership. So that is one. Artificial intelligence and these kind of softwares are definitely used because of the fact that you have vast amounts of data which is generated, right? So one cannot sift through these, humanly impossible to for a person to go look at this and sort of join the dots. So there are many softwares which are used in the intelligence agencies. Some open source material talks about softwares like Netra, CMS, and others actually being used by agencies to look at various pieces of electronic data. signals, telecom, and many things which are actually sifting through. So that is all which is there in the public domain. So I'm not at liberty to speak more on that, but definitely it is something that we are using. That, and it is we have to build it up. Cyber command is also something that has been proposed. So this is an area which is still work in progress, and the government has appointed a successor to Dr. Gulshan Rai. So there is an idea that this is something that they are interested in building up the capacities and capabilities. The NSCS has a separate vertical which is focused only on this. So the realization is there that this is an area which needs continued sustained focus by the government, and this is something that needs to be done. So I hope that answers the question to
Yeah.
some extent.
Thank you for your questions, Rahul and Shri. Thank you for answering. Any other question? Any other who would like to ask the speaker directly or want to ask? If anyone else has a question. Uh, Right, so I think we are done with the question answer session, and I hope it was quite. Yes, Suraj, I see Suraj. Suraj, one of my junior from Rashtriya colleague from Rashtriya Rakshak University, wants to ask a question. Suraj, you may go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. First of all, it was a great presentation, Arun sir, and I do have one question, and it will be more of a takeaway if I get some insights regarding this question. So, with respect to the intelligence agencies of India, what are some of the drawbacks, or what are some of the limitations the intelligence agencies of India have when compared to the global firms such as the CIA, or even in fact even the growing Chinese intelligence agencies? So I would like to have a review from your end as to what are some of the limitations that you have gone through or you have acknowledged over these years of research.
It's a difficult question. Um, uh, for example, if we compare it uh, to the West, maybe to the US or the UK, for instance, uh, much younger agencies, and secondly, also in terms of capacities, money, resources, uh, much we are far behind the United States, and that is a function of economies of scale, function on of what they are actually much ahead in terms of the money they can pour into these agencies. uh, the NSA or the CIA have their own military sort of operation, special operation groups, black operation groups, which is far. If you read any of this thing about the operation to capture Osama bin Laden, or in entering into Pakistan, you do realize the kind of the fact that they are more military uh, uh, dominated, Pentagon dominated agencies rather than civilian dominated agencies. So I would say that in some that sense they are far ahead of us. Uh, One area, like I mentioned, that we should definitely invest in on a sustained basis is to ramp up our human resources within the agencies. We have lots of young, bright people from across the board, from various walks of life, technical, political science, economics, international relations, defense studies, which will be who will be an asset for these agencies, and to catch them young is always the crucial thing. That once you are older, you are looking for a desk job, you are married, so you will might not be very willing to take the risks which are needed for an intelligence operative or intelligence officer. So that is what all intelligence agencies across the world do. They catch people from the campuses through campus interviews. CIA, for instance, has they advertise on their own website only, right? And they have their various training schools which have websites. I'm not saying having websites is the idea, is the answer to this problem. But what I am saying is we need to be open about recruiting to this, recruit from campuses, various other places, because the nature of the threats is dynamic. You need people who know economics also, because so many financial transactions happen. Terrorists use these kind of methods to send money across the globe. You have technical challenges which are there, so you need S&T scientific people. You have political risk which are needed, so you need people with IR, defense studies, political science background. So we need to actually ramp up our capabilities, our capacities, which is very, very required for our agencies. We definitely cannot match up in terms of the resources, neither should we match them for dollar to dollar. We don't need to do that. But given our multiple threats, internal, external security check threats, we have two neighbors on our borders who we have fought wars with, who continue to have border disputes with, continue to be inimical to our interests. We have very real security challenges, and the intelligence agencies are a very important tool, as Ankit rightly pointed out, of statecraft. And we definitely need to give them more teeth in terms of being able to address our national security challenges.
Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I guess Shelly, are you there with us? If you want to ask your question, I see your hands raised. Shelly, do you have a question? I guess so we are not able to get in touch with. Yeah, Shelly, you want to go ahead with the question?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Good morning. I would like to ask what kind of languages should an intelligence know? Those basic ones for penetration, maybe, and for collection of data, collection of information.
It depends. There are various languages. Chinese, for one, is something which various intelligence agencies look for. Chinese language specialists. You have, in terms of lot of political intelligence, is also covered by our agencies. So European languages are also. Arabic is something which is there, which is looked at. Because there is so much of information about terrorist organizations, their portals, websites, social media platforms, so much of communication on blogs, websites, chat rooms which are happening in Arabic, Persian. So we need to be able to read them. We need to be able to understand them, see what is being discussed in these places. So these are some of the languages which are definitely in demand by many of these agencies, Indian agencies. Chinese, Arabic, Chinese, uh, uh, many of these East Asian languages are definitely high up, I would say.
So we will end here with the question answer session. I guess it was quite an enlightening talk, sir, quite an insightful presentation from your side, and a lot of key takeaways. I initially started taking notes, but I then realized that you had a lot to tell, and I stopped at some point. I stopped taking notes at some point. I guess that must be similar for all of us, I believe. So to conclude, sir, I would like to firstly thank you. Thanks a lot to take out your time and give us this talk. And I would like to thank the and I guess we have listeners who are thanking. I see Puneet writing a message thanking you for the insightful talk. I would like
Thank
to
you.
thank the participants, I guess, who have joined us from, I guess, two universities, Central University Gujarat, as well as my own university, Rashtriya Raksha University. Apart from that, sir, I would like to thank the Rashtriya Raksha University to provide us a platform so that we are able to talk